And we're back. I've been getting a lot of ads for this while I've been watching basketball games. It looks like it's going to be a pretty exciting weekend in the combat world. Max, why don't you preview the UFC and Bellator events coming up this weekend?
Yeah, we'll get to the Bellator event after, but first, UFC 258 this weekend. It's by far the best card the UFC has put on in my recent memory. I'm really excited for this card. It is honestly fantastic, top to bottom, and I had such a annoying time writing my breakdown for this one because I had to cross out like three fights I otherwise would have loved to talk about because these segments drag on too long already, and I want to talk about a little Bellator. So I'm really excited for this card. I'm going to be tuning in right from the first event all the way to the end. We'll get to the first fight on the card later, but as usual, we're going to kick off with the main event where Kamaru Usman is going to defend the welterweight title against Gilbert Burns. So the backstory or the overarching theme kind of behind this fight is that these are two former training partners who were at the same gym for a long time and helped each other in their runs. I'll get to that later, but let's start by talking about the game of Kamaru Usman. I think it's incredibly simple to break down. I see it as a pyramid. So you've got 2 points at the base of that pyramid, setting the foundation, his strength and his cardio. And what that foundation lets him do is put on relentless, insane pressure. So, what does that translate to in the cage? It means everyone he fights, he just walks them forward. He gets their back near the cage. He grabs a hold of them and he does not let go. He stays very busy or just busy enough, however you like it, on the cage with his foot stomps, his digs to the rib, where the rounds just whittle away and he stacks them up. It's a very risk averse fighting style where every position he puts himself in is one where he is winning the rounds and not in any threat of getting stopped or hurt or really even having the position reversed. You've seen him do this against Jorge Masvidal. You've seen him do this against Tyron Woodley. You've seen him do this against Rafael dos Anjos. There's a couple exceptions in there where he hasn't done that, where he's chosen to strike, those being Colby Covington and Damian Maia. And I think those also speak to the risk averse nature. So I'm not, I'm trying to be very careful with my words, but the underlying tone would be it's a boring fighting style. The one fight he's put on that was not boring was the one against Colby Covington, but I think that one does still strengthen my case that he's an incredibly risk averse fighter, because essentially what he did against Covington was say, I'm just going to go punch for punch with this guy. And that doesn't sound risk adverse at first, but then when you think about Covington's last fight against Robbie Lawler, where he landed 500 strikes and never really had Lawler injured, even though it was an incredible performance, saying, okay, I'll go punch for punch with this pillow fisted guy makes, I think, is why I think of it as a risk averse performance. So the other really interesting part or fight he's had that he didn't use his grappling, his cage stalling, his takedowns was Damian Maia, who is, I think, by far the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner in mixed martial arts. That is where we get to Gilbert Burns and what makes this fight interesting, because Gilbert Burns, while probably not at Damian Maia's level, is a very high level black belt Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. He has the ability to submit off his back if you make a mistake. Um, which begs the question, is Kamaru Usman going to treat him like he treated Damian Maia, or is he going to do his usual thing? If the other difference, though, between Damian Maia and Gilbert Burns is Gilbert Burns has knockout power. In fact, he knocked out Damian Maia, which a lot of people beat Damian Maia on the feet. Not a lot of people knock him out. I mean, he's been in there with some killers. Tyron Woodley, Lyman Good has crazy knockout power. Kamaru Usman has some power if he lands square, and none of them were able to put Maia away, but Gilbert Burns was. So that speaks to the power and striking of Gilbert Burns. We saw it again when he sat Tyron Woodley down right in the first round, which kind of set the tone of the fight that he dictated. So stylistically, it is, if you're going to ask for two things to challenge Usman's game, it would be jiu-jitsu that makes him hesitant about grappling and knockout power that keeps him on his toes in the striking. So I think the place that Usman wins this fight is the place he wins all of his fights, with his opponent against the cage, just doing the same thing he always does, back them up with the pressure. He's so strong that if you worry too much about the grappling, he's going to throw hands and you really don't want him landing on you. It has been fascinating to watch the striking develop. The body shots won him the Covington fight, in my opinion. He landed a couple nice ones on Masvidal, having switched his camp to work with Trevor Whitman, one of the best minds in the game. You've got to think the more time he spends there, just the more well-rounded, technical, intelligent his game is going to get. So I'm expecting Usman to come out with his usual pressure, show some tricky, interesting striking, but simple game, get Burns' back against the fence, hold him there, toe stomp, rib punch his way to victory, because he doesn't get tired. It's everyone calls it the most exhausting part of the game, the clinch work. Like when you hold a guy there, you have to keep your muscles so taut and flexed the whole time, which just like sends the blood through them and gasses so quickly, let alone like doing that while throwing like 30 nonstop punches to the ribs. Because if you don't do that, the ref will separate you. And Usman has just kind of mastered staying busy enough on the cage to keep the ref from separating and just letting the rounds whittle away. And it's a slow acting poison where in one round you don't want to burn all your energy getting away from that, but if you don't make your move sooner or later, you're going to be down 3 rounds, and then it's like shit. So I'm going to look, what I always look for when people are fighting Usman is the footwork. Can they find a way to neutralize that relentless pressure by circling and keeping it in the middle of the octagon? Because his open mat takedown game is not the same as the clinch game, and the ability to get takedowns off the clinch when people get too preoccupied with breaking away. I'm going to be looking for what Usman does if it does go to the mat. I mean, Masvidal was able to have some nice get-ups. He was willing to grapple with Rafael dos Anjos, who I think is the most similar fighter on his record to Burns. Burns and Usman knowing each other will make the grappling exchanges that much more interesting, because they'll be able to think 1, 2, 3 chess moves in advance. Okay, I know what he likes to do from this position. If Usman does get to the ground, is he going to look to get off some ground and pound? That if the jiu-jitsu fighter is thinking leg lock, thinking sweep, thinking scramble, sometimes you can catch them in an open position and everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Or is it going to be more a la the Tyron Woodley fight, where he gets like a dominant full mount position, but he really doesn't want to risk losing it, so he just stays with his hips very tight and doesn't really posture up? Should be an interesting main event. A couple more wins, and Usman has his name right up there with GSP in the welterweight records. So we'll see what happens there, and I'll be willing to break it down. I think Usman's game is just so safe, and hard to beat, short of like a Hail Mary submission or knockout. That even though Burns has those two facets, I don't think he has them in at a high enough level where it's likely he's going to pull them off. And I think Usman just is one of those fighters where fear makes him better. We saw that, or fear adds to his game. We saw that in the Masvidal fight. He knew how much of a threat Masvidal was in the cage and just didn't give him a second of breathing room. I think the knowledge of what Burns could do is going to motivate Usman to be that much more safe and dominant. And that's what we're going to see. I'm excited for this whole card though. So moving on to the co-main event, Macy Barber making her return to the octagon after a 1-year layoff. You don't know that name yet, eh? Well, you might in a few, because this girl has the confidence that if she makes it to the top, people are going to look at her run and go, wow. And that was the story a year ago. The UFC kind of set her up with a layup, to be honest. Do you remember the name Roxanne Modafferi?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
She fought a couple weeks ago. I wasn't sure. Yeah, I mean, that seemed like a layup fight for Macy Barber, taking on a higher ranked opponent who had no striking game to speak of. And I mean, Macy was on a great TKO knockout run through the women's division to that point, and then the experience of Roxanne let her put on what might have been the biggest feather in her cap win. Just the judo let her take it to the ground, and then she showed some excellent top pressure and had a dominant victory, although Macy injured her leg in that fight, which has kept her out this whole year. So I'm really curious what Macy 2.0 looks like, having had that year layoff. She's just as confident now as she was before, which that confidence is a strength. It is a weapon. Like, that self-belief lets you overcome a lot of bad situations and lets you put yourself in a lot of dominant situations without even having to get into those bad situations. The best defense is a good offense. But she's fighting a similarly experienced opponent, and that experience comes at a higher level than where most of Roxy's has. Alexa Grasso has been a longtime UFC staple, who's a striker, not a grappler. So similar to Modafferi in the experience, different in the style. It's interesting because you'd think Grasso would be talking about the grappling or thinking about the grappling, but the one who's done most of the speaking about winning the fight through grappling has been Macy. So I'm not sure if she's going to come out like she has in her previous fights, just walking forward with that pressure. She's got power in her hands and great timing to land it, but she's going to be trying to do so against the best striker she's had to go up against thus far in her career. Is She's obviously spoken about working on her wrestling, so you need that well-roundedness, especially in the flyweight division with the champ being Valentina Shevchenko. If Macy can overcome Grasso, I think that puts her right ahead of where she was before that Modafferi fight, and she's already talking about, like, then I want to fight Calderwood, then I want to fight for the belt. I don't know about that. I don't know about a win over Calderwood earning a UFC title shot, but it again speaks to the confidence that Barber has and eyes on the top. We've seen that work out very well for some fighters, Conor McGregor, Israel Adesanya, and we've seen that work out very terribly for so many fighters I can't name. So we'll see what's in the future for Macy Barber, and we'll see what going up against like some real UFC talent is, because Grasso's probably as good as anyone is in that division. And the move to flyweight, I think moving up a weight class probably benefits female fighters even more than male fighters because the weight cut's that much harder for them. Grasso looked great in her flyweight debut. She had a striking clinic years back against Karolina Kowalkiewicz. If she can survive and weather the early pressure, make her reads on the timing, find her range, I think it could be a long and frustrating night for Maycee Barber, but I was on the hype train. Modafferi made it look so easy that it was like, let me jump right off that. But I'm still waiting at the station and willing to jump right back on board with an opponent like Alexa Grasso lined up for Maycee Barber, because it's a dig and a compliment when I say Grasso is as good as anyone in this division. If Maycee Barber can get a win over her, then I'd pretty comfortably pick her over anyone not named Jessica Andrade or Valentina Shevchenko at flyweight. So really interesting co-main event. Looking forward to it. Next fight on the card is Kelvin Gastelum versus Ian Henisch. Gastelum is one of those fighters who revisionist history is currently not kind to at all. I mean, he was less than 48 hours away from stepping into the octagon to compete for an undisputed UFC championship. And since then, he's on a 3-fight skid, and we're looking back in his record and saying, wow, this guy doesn't have any wins over top 15 opponents who are younger than 35 years old, give or take. I didn't research that roughly, but like Vitor Belfort, Michael Bisping coming off that St. Pierre loss, the wins Gastelum has put together don't he hasn't gotten any wins over those fighters in their prime. And when he has gone up against fighters in their prime, Israel Adesanya, Darren Till, uh, who did Marvin Vettori? Jack Hermanson. He's struggled, and he's kind of the performances have gotten worse in that order. I mean, he was 1 round away from beating Israel Adesanya for the UFC interim championship, and he had a lot of great moments. He probably put Adesanya in the most danger anyone's put him in the octagon. But then I think Darren Till put on a perfect game plan on how to neutralize Kelvin Gastelum, and I'm really curious to see how Ian Henisch is gonna fight with that game plan having been put on display. Keep him at range. Don't let him close the distance, because those hooks, that power left hook is his biggest weapon. As he circles into your power side, hit him with that southpaw power kick, take away some of the power, and every time he explodes, every time he tries to get in hook range, clinch him up to take away the power and not let him land that hook. Till did that in a very nervous state, but he did it fairly exemplarily, even if it was not a crazy high-paced performance. And then Jack Hermanson, just with his fantastic jiu-jitsu game, went right after that heel hook and took him out in no time. But Heinisch, I don't know if he's as well situated to put on that Till game plan, because he's a pressure fighter. He kind of live by the sword, die by the sword type fighter. He wins his fights by going forward and landing and making the other opponent wilt. And that's worked out amazing for him. For example, in his last fight with that like 1 minute knockout against Gerald Meerschaert, and it's worked out not so great for him in the Derek Brunson fight, where he got that early knockdown but just kind of blew his load looking for the finish, and then had to deal with a very cardio friendly fighter in Derek Brunson. Against Gastelum, cardio is never like a strong suit, but never really an issue. I mean, he went 5 rounds with Adesanya and looked fine up to the 5th round. So 3 rounds, you're not really worried about it. He's got so much power in his hands that he doesn't have to throw that many to get the respect. He can kind of dictate the fight at his pace and be a threat without like having to throw at a pace that's going to gas him. So he doesn't have Max Holloway cardio, but he's usually fine over 3 rounds. So I'm really curious. Does Henisch try and drag him into a firefight and make him throw more than he normally likes to, make him tired and make him be the first guy to wilt? Does he try and implement that Darren Till game plan? Is he going to fight at southpaw, fight at orthodox? Because that left power hook of Gastelum is going to land easier if Henisch comes out orthodox, but he's probably more comfortable orthodox. He does have a wrestling background, so I think the biggest takeaway from the Till game plan should be to utilize that clinch every time it gets close. It just was so effective at taking away Gastelum's most dangerous weapon. And then last off is the mental game for both fighters. I mean, Gastelum on a 3-fight slide, each opponent kind of less at the top than the last. So each loss, in a way, looking worse than the last, although I guess that's debatable where you rank Hermanson and Till. And for Henisch, he had a great run, got into the top 15, and then wilted against Derek Brunson and Omar Yakhmedov. He got his taste of the top. He wasn't quite there. Impressive win over Gerald Meerschaert, who I think is a highly underrated fighter, probably more so these days with that 2020 losses against both Henisch and Khamzat Chimaev. But what is that taste of going up against prime top 15 fighters and being turned back going to add to his game? What adjustments, what wrinkles, what mental work has he added? I'm really fascinated to see. Again, this is an awesome third fight on the card. Next fight, I'll highlight it. It's I think a pretty straightforward one to break down. Bobby Green versus Jim Miller. Two long time UFC vets. I'm pretty excited for this fight. The UFC vet fights have been great lately. Alex Morano versus Anthony Pettis going a few weeks back, and then last week we had Clay Guida versus Michael Johnson. This fight probably very similar to Clay Guida, Michael Johnson, in that both fighter has their domain they want this fight to happen in. For Jim Miller, that's going to be on the ground. You look at his record and he's won all the fights he's won by submission. All the fights he hasn't gotten a submission, he was lost. Some of those decisions have been close, most notably the Scott Holtzman one. Bobby Green, excellent striker with a wrestling background. You just want this fight where your game is stronger and your opponent game is weaker. And for Bobby Green, that's in the middle. For Jim Miller, that's on the mat. But the nice thing about them both being UFC vets is they both have good games in their weaker area. They don't want the fight to happen there, but they can certainly make it a fight in either of those places. Jim Miller wants this to go to the mat. He wants to be looking for submission and winning rounds on top, but it's not like he's helpless on the feet. And Bobby Green, I mean, if you're a UFC striker and you've been around long enough, you're going to have had plenty of guys try and take you down before. I'm pretty sure Green comes from a wrestling background. So just how is Jim Miller going to fare on the feet to set up his takedowns and make Bobby Green have lots to think about to disguise them? And how is Bobby Green's takedown defense going to hold up? Like I said, I think if this fight goes to the mat, Miller takes it. And if it stays on the floor, Bobby Green takes it. So should be a good one. The next fight I want to talk about, Ricky Simone making a pretty quick turnaround to the octagon. I feel like he fought not 2 weeks ago against Brian Kelleher. This fight been scheduled a couple times. It's going to be happening at featherweight since Simone just made the quick turnaround. He didn't want to cut weight, and Kelleher was happy to oblige him on that. Simone, a really excellent pressure wrestling style, just Habib-esque in his ability to grind on you, break you down, and make you make a mistake and capitalize on it. Kelleher, a little more well-rounded, almost similar to the main event in that it's going to be a wrestler against a guy with some submission game and some knockout power. Uh, Nickname Boom Boom for Baldy Ed. He's got some crisp, sharp hands when he wants to land them or when he can land them. And he's also got a fantastic guillotine that he's won several fights by. And that's going to be a double-edged weapon for him. If he is too confident in it, because he had 2 guillotine wins in 2020, if he just goes for it the first chance, he's probably going to burn his arms out. And Simone's going to be happy to play possum for 60 seconds and then just take advantage of the gassed opponent, which his style is very well suited for. But if Simone takes a bad shot, if he's a little too careless going in and he does give Kelleher the right angle, that's going to be really dangerous for him. But if I'm Kelleher, I'm using the guillotine as a thing to show, to threaten with, and to set up some scrambles and get ups if it does go to the cage or onto the mat. Kelleher talked about wanting to knock Simone out. I think this fight does go better for him on the feet, and just the judges, if the guy's trying to take you down and you can deny those takedowns, then even if the striking is close, the judges seem to favor that, which I have mixed feelings about. Um, but yeah, this is kind of a underrated fight, I think, between 2 bantamweights who, I don't know if Simone has a number next to his name again or not, but it just speaks to the depth of that division. For Simone, he gets this win and he's probably got, I mean, for both fighters, they've probably got a solid top 15 opponent next. For Simone, it's just a matter of continuing to pile up the wins. He had his setbacks, but he's looking like he could be a top prospect in this division. For Kelleher, he's had his chances at some high level guys, John Lineker, Montel Jackson, Cody Stamen, hasn't been able to get it done. So I'm just another chance at that to turn a corner in his game and really start taking on the top of the division. Should be a fantastic fight. The last fight I wanted to talk about and break down is my girl, Jillian Robertson, the Canadian, taking on Miranda Maverick. Quick turnaround for Robertson after that December loss to Talia Santos. Miranda Maverick has one fight in the UFC, which she won by doctor's stoppage via cut. And I can't really be impartial for this breakdown, so I'm not even going to try. For Robertson, it's a matter of continuing to round out her game, to not get away from her strongest part, but to make other parts of her game able to complement that rather than hold her back. And for her, that's going to be the takedowns and the striking. The grappling is so phenomenal for her. She's one of my favorite female fighters for just her relentlessness and for her willingness to always go for it. I think she's leading the women's flyweight in submissions, but because she just doesn't settle for position, she's always hunting for that finish, and so able and capable once she gets on top to do that. The problem is the ability to get to that position, and that really held her back in her last fight. She just didn't want to be striking with Santos, so she had to go for shots right away, and that just put her in poor positions. Maverick, interesting, similarly well-rounded to Santos, but I think at lower levels in all facets. I mean, she showed great Muay Thai to get that doctor stoppage TKO win. A lot of her earlier fights in Invicta came from submission, so she can grapple, she can strike, but sometimes the jack of all trades loses in the area where the opponent is strongest, and that's all you've got to do. Make this fight happen in your best. So I kind of expect Robertson to continue to just go right for that grappling, set it up right away, and then just find a way to make it happen once it's on the mat. I mean, she's training with Dean Thomas and one other fighter who he gives all his attention to. So I'm just waiting to see the game continue to improve and enjoying watching the rise, even the improvements we've seen so far. I do love the attitude, which is just I'm always training. I I'm never um the fights aren't about like taking the game to the next level. The fights are milestone to show where the game is at. And she just tries to get in there as much as the UFC will let her and get that octagon experience and then back to the camp to continue working to improve. So excited to see what the last 2 months have brought for her. All right, that wraps up the fights I'm going to break down for UFC 258. Shout outs to a couple other fights on the card: Julian Marquez versus Maki Pitolo, the main card opener; Diego Lima versus Bilal Muhammad, two excellent welterweights; and Andre Ewell versus Chris Guertiez, two fighters in that deep bantamweight division I mentioned earlier. Those are all fantastic fights as well. This goes on too long and there's only so many fights I can break down. But all in all, it's a really excellent card. I'm right from Jillian Robertson's fight to the main event. I intend to watch it all and I cannot wait.